Welcome to Waiting on the Trade, a comics book club for people who can't keep up with monthly comics. I'm Matt Ledger.
I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck.
And I'm Jonathan Gurney.
This month, we're talking about The Private Eye, an eerily prescient 2013 comic from Brian K. Vaughan, Marcos Martin, and Muntsa Vicente. Now, in case you need a refresher, The Private Eye is a look into a post-internet future in which the United States has shut down the web and embraced real-world privacy. In this world, the press are the police, most people wear masks, and one private investigator is drawn into an attempt to kick things back to the good old days. Now that we've floundered our way through the introduction, Jono, welcome back.
What is this?
Thank you. It is an honor to be back.
You talked over Jono, Pat. How rude.
No, it's there. It's there.
You interrupted our guest.
Yeah, but it was for ribbing at you, so I feel it was worth it.
This is going to be a punchy
I am
one,
with
isn't it?
Pat on this one.
Haha!
That's fine.
Thanks for talking over me, though, Matt.
You're welcome.
John, it's great to have you back.
Oh, what a pleasure. So, guys, this was an interesting choice of comic book. Matt, in the intro, both times you said that this is a 2013 comic. I actually thought this was 2015. So that's good to know. In fact, that makes it almost scary, more scary, how prescient some of the themes, I guess, that it raises are.
Right? So this is, I'd mentioned this before we recorded, like, one of the books where Pat was excited about it enough to text me before we started recording, which is a very good sign for the podcast. And while we were talking about it, I was telling him that this book is like a decade old, and it doesn't feel a decade old at all. And it's not quite a decade old, but like it's getting there.
Yeah. 8 odd years is still quite a long time, especially in terms of technology, isn't it?
Yeah, and like what I think of the little things in the book that like absolutely slay me of like, oh my god, this is correct. It's just like the giant Tesla billboard in one of the pages. Because like in 2013, who would have guessed? Apparently Brian K. Vaughan / Marcos Martin.
Yeah.
But yeah, we came to this book in an interesting roundabout way too, because Jono, you had basically said, "Hey, I'll read whatever," which is both like a very good thing and a very bad thing because it leaves like the limitless option of all comic books available.
Well, I think 2 episodes that I've been on the podcast. The first one was a recommendation from yourself, which was Die, which really enjoyed, and I've not kept up with it beyond the second volume, but I will be picking up the third volume. And then there was my recommendation of the Hardy Boys, which I still enjoyed it, but was perhaps not as good as Die. So I think it was more not wanting to recommend another comic book that didn't quite live up to what I enjoyed.
I gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So basically, I talked about it with Pat of like, hey, what books would you want to read? And frequent guest host and wife of me, Kat, of like, hey, what books do you think Jana would enjoy? Because she was kind of there when you got your comic reading start, I suppose, quote unquote. Not really.
Very
but
true.
So Kat actually recommended The Private Eye, and then we put it through multiple rounds of intense voting, scrutiny, and study, and we ended up reading The Private Eye. So none of us actually recommended this book to be read today.
and yet a really great choice, yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It sounds like both of you did too.
Yeah, I'm still blown away that this was a 2013 book, because it does feel like it could have been written last year or 2019 with some of the themes and things like that. I mean, in 2013, one of my jobs was doing social media for a university. And you know, at that point, I think we were slowly starting to well, probably not slowly, but I think we were becoming more and more aware of the potential for abuse by the companies that we were handing our data over to. And indeed, there was obviously a lot of evidence that it was going on. But I think the scandals that kind of rocked the tech world following that. I mean, in 2013, to give you some some idea. I mean, Uber had just come to Perth, and it was huge. People were so excited by this new way to get around, because up until that point, taxis were ruinously expensive. The idea was they could actually be quite unreliable as well. I mean, I think just the year before, in 2012, the taxis rolled out a new system where you could pay $5 and they would promise to try to get to you within 20 minutes of your call. And that was considered to be like that was their on-time guarantee, except that they wouldn't guarantee it, but you'd still have to pay it.
The VIP services maybe will get to you.
Exactly right. And so in 2013, Uber launched, and people were really excited for it. And I think that was also when, in America, perhaps Uber was just starting to have some of the I guess some of the information about Uber was coming to light. And so the fact that somebody like Brian K. Vaughan was obviously thinking about this in as early as 2011, if you reading through some of the extras in the comic book when he made the pitch to the team, I think is quite impressive, and makes for an excellent book.
Yeah, I found an interview actually with Vaughan and Marcos Martin yesterday talking about this book. There aren't a ton of them out there like about this book, but I found one that was pretty good. And Brian K. Vaughan had basically mentioned that like he didn't so much have a story in mind for this book as he had a bunch of questions that he wanted to try to figure out the answers to. And I think you can definitely see that in the book. Yeah. And I think it kind of comes across even in the fact that Pat and I had talked about this a little bit off mic. Like, the book is sort of it's almost an argument for like, should we or should we not have the social media and the internet and stuff? But I don't think it quite gets to that point, because I don't think there's a compelling case made for keeping it. Like, I think there's a great case made for getting rid of social media and the internet, but I don't think the quote-unquote villain of the piece, Nom de Guerre, or whatever his actual name, Kelly de Guerre, like, I don't think his argument actually ever comes across as anything but it's good, actually. And I feel like we might have to have that discussion, because I think there is a case to be made.
I'm really looking forward to that argument, yes.
Well, let's have it. We're doing this one non-linearly.
Oh my god, right now, oh my gosh.
I'm very much in favor of slowly becoming a hermit. So I mean, like, on Facebook, I've largely stopped using it almost entirely. I still have a presence, because there's some family that's the only way to stay in touch with them. But certainly a huge amount of concern, I guess, about that sort of information, and I get quite. I wouldn't say I'm paranoid about it, but I certainly get there's a lot behind the scenes in terms of laws and things that have been passed in Australia in the last decade, I'd say, around your privacy and things like that. And unfortunately, a lot of it is not good news for privacy. A lot of it sort of revolves around the first was mandatory metadata retention for internet service providers. So metadata is harmless, so we're told, but metadata can actually tell you quite a bit. And in typical kind of government style, they couldn't really tell us why they wanted to collect it or what it was that they were collecting, but they were telling us it was going to happen. And they assured us that it would only be used for specific purposes, but it later turned out that pretty much any and every agency, government agency that wanted to access it could. And some of those agencies would have very legitimate reasons for accessing it, but that's not a comfort, so to speak. The argument did essentially boil down to, if you haven't done anything wrong, then you haven't got anything to worry about. And I'm not somebody who habitually goes online and commits crimes, but
just occasionally, not habitually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, it has to be a special occasion, and I have to do a lot of preparation for it. So it is I do like to make it quite the to do, but I don't want my metadata being collected. I mean, and the Australian government does not have a great track record in terms of safely storing that sort of information. And because they've largely foisted the responsibility onto the internet service providers, but there's no funding or anything for these providers to do the extra work that would be involved.
Oh, good. One of those, hey, you must do this, but there's no money to help you do it, bills. That's great.
Precisely. And at the same time as they were doing all of this, they rolled out they were basically stripping protections from whistleblowers. So, if you found out that the government was doing something wrong and you tried to alert people, you could go to jail immediately. And if you were a journalist who reported on something that later turned out was a matter of national security, you could also go to jail. So even if you were reporting on something that you weren't aware was a matter of national security, it could later be termed to be a matter of national security, and you could go to jail. And I just don't think that that's a particularly I think what they essentially have done is they've looked at the limitless possibility of something like the internet, and they've, rather than kind of saying, well, how can we educate people to sort of make informed decisions, and how can we sort of work with our intelligence agencies and our police force and indeed with schools and with other organizations that have a stake to create an environment where people can feel safe in using this, but it is not necessarily open to abuse by bad faith actors who want to scam or who want to use it to cause harm. I think instead they've just kind of gone, oh, would it be easier for us if we just basically just collect everything like a giant sieve for the metadata, and then we just prosecute if as and when needed.
Yeah, instead of using it as like a tool to build a utopia, what if we just built a mass surveillance state instead?
Precisely. Exactly right.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like the internet is one of those technologies to me that is a tool, and it's only as good as the people who use it and what they use it for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're coming up on the point where a lot of people use it very, very, very poorly. But that doesn't mean that people couldn't and don't use it very well. Like, I think all of us probably read this book as a result of the internet. Like, I bought and downloaded the digital copies. I don't know what you guys.
Certainly. Yep, I did the same.
I mean, that's what I was going to point out. There's like a delicious irony to this podcast discussion in general, because we're speaking internationally over the internet.
Right? Like, there's so
Recording
many.
it over the internet. This comic book gained fame for being like one of the first online
ones
comics to like be a huge success, primarily because it was online.
Precisely right. The Australian government knows that I am talking to somebody in the United States. They would be gathering the metadata from this conversation.
I'm sure Discord. I don't know how much Discord. Like, they might be recording us right now. I'm sure they have logs of all the texts.
Let's say, I assume like any company that has text chat has a log of all the text chat somewhere. Like,
well, it's like they say, if you aren't paying for a thing, you are the product. Like, Discord is free. Point, it is a very good software, so they're getting money somehow to run this thing.
Yep. Exactly right.
I think that the argument of like ease of access to information is not made in this book. I think one of the scenes that drove that home to me was they go to the library to get Taj's like search history, right? Yeah. And then somehow they're able to immediately access and like buy all of the books in her search history. Bullshit, says I. Like,
what's the problem? Like, the internet has facilitated so much stuff. Like, without the internet, I don't know how. Like, how does industry work without the internet at this point?
I mean, like the multiple podcasts I've listened to have talked about how the economy would have just like tanked much harder during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
If we didn't have access to the work at home tools that we have access to now.
They're talking about these levitating cars that they invented 5 years after the burst. It's like, how did a new technology like take over? Like, it's insane. Things would have slowed down so dramatically if the internet wasn't around.
And I think it pins a lot of the blame on the internet that perhaps that obscures other issues around, like the politicization of research and things. And I mean, that's not a new problem, but I think these days, it's very hard to get an Australian Research Council grant, for example. Because they've restricted the stuff because they don't like some of the topics that researchers investigate because they feel that they're too leftist. And I mean, like that's not a problem unique to this period in history, but that does sort of like it pins a lot of blame on the internet for the reason that we have this lack of advancement. Whereas there's a lot of other problems in the world that you can't just simply point at the internet. I mean, if anything, the internet has made research better because researchers from around the world can share their findings with each other. And it's made it worse because some countries use that, they steal those findings, or they use this as an example of why researchers shouldn't get funded. So in Australia, for example, there's new legislation that should stop certain universities being able to work with any kind of Chinese institutions, because there's some potentially legitimate fear about what they call technology transfer, where essentially the Chinese government would potentially take some of that research and use it for military or economic benefit, which is, there is legitimate fear there. But that's still, there's still other factors there. The internet is not the internet is just the transmission vector for a bigger virus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it accelerates good things and bad things, because that's what the internet does. Is it just like accelerates the sharing of knowledge and the evolution of like topics, trends, knowledge, culture, everything. Like, because the internet has this like super connected information highway going on, it just makes everything spin faster. And so it spins good things faster and it spins bad things faster, and it's also subject to the people who use it. And I think especially lately, a lot of bad actors have figured out how to use the internet really well, and I think the good actors are not catching up as quickly as they should, or exist in some cases.
It's true. I mean, there's a duality to the internet. It cuts both ways, right? The fact that we have Trump and people on Twitter who just like spouting hate, and you get the people in echo chambers who just convince themselves that there's only one way to look at the world. That's awful.
Exactly.
Social media is probably going to be like one of the biggest problems that we're going to have to conquer in the coming years. But at the same time, we have civil rights movements and like the accountability for our policing force that the internet is forcing people to deal with. Like, without the video clips of horrible acts that our police officers have committed, I don't think social reform would have been, like, the social movement wouldn't be there as strongly as it is now, right?
Yeah, Kat and I talked about this
Definitely.
as people who live in Minnesota, because we're relatively engaged with like the George Floyd trial, because I wanted to know if basically the city was going to erupt in protests again. And I think without the actual footage of Derek Chauvin killing George Floyd, like, there's a very good chance that Derek Chauvin gets off, and he didn't, because we had the footage and it was shared so widely that like this time it couldn't happen. So again,
It's huge. It's huge, and it wouldn't have happened without the internet. So
Precisely.
it's a strange beast. And yeah, I don't know if you can like damn it completely or praise it, but it's there, and it's certainly not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think this book is very much concerned more with people putting themselves out there via their search histories and their social media profiles and stuff like that, than it is concerned with kind of tackling some of the other
Well, that was my
edges of
problem.
the.
Like the description of the burst, like your search histories
Yes.
will be. It seemed really superficial. Like, I don't think society would crumble. Yes, we'd probably see some like really messed up stuff from some people, but it would be an embarrassment.
And I think if it would be universal as well. I mean, I think it's one of those kinds of things. I think as human beings, I think we're very good at that sort of that shared sense of, oh God, it's like that feeling of waking up from a hangover. But I think I strongly to living in student accommodation, when you wake up with a hangover, but so is everybody else.
Right.
And there's that shared sort of sense of just like, oh, we probably shouldn't have drunk as much last night as we did. And I think I would feel very strongly that the cloudburst, if it did occur, I think a lot of us would probably retreat rather than being embarrassed of what we saw. I think we'd all be so mortified about everything about it all happening that we wouldn't mention to anyone what we'd seen, because it would just be, you're just opening yourself up to this exactly the same treatment.
Well, you see the weird, whenever like a celebrity sex tape gets revealed, or like Chris Evans' dick pic gets shown, like, yes, it's embarrassing, but like they've moved on. Like, they're still as popular, if not more so now than they were before. I think people would get over it, depending on the severity of what's being revealed.
I was gonna say it might depend, right? Like, I don't know. I was thinking of, so in this and I think Vaughan even mentions this in the back matter, like basically what's going on is people can assume sock puppet accounts, like fake identities in real life. And I don't know how that's much different than
That's
being able to.
worse, though, right?
That's what I was thinking. Is like, is that not worse than being able to do it online? Because at least online, like, you can assume that that person's not a real person in some cases.
They're
Like,
taking like the depravity that they did privately out into the public, and I think that world is worse in some
maybe
ways.
Would
maybe what
agree.
happens is that because people don't act the same way publicly that they do on the internet, the depravity isn't as bad. I
But
don't know.
it's all anonymous though, right? You got all these weird masks and things that you can change.
Yep.
Like we see people soliciting sex in this comic book just on the streets, or like taking drugs with no like concern of being out in public because you can't identify them. That's worse. Like that's not better.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? Because when Ravina is interviewed by, oh, I'm forgetting the journalist, Strunk at this
Yep.
in her sister's bedroom, like he asks whether she's gonna like give testimony under her real name or not. That's wild that you can give testimony to the police while anonymous.
It's not even, but it's not the police, right? It's the press.
I mean, it's basically the
Yeah.
police, which maybe this is a good time to seg into. Can you imagine a world where the world lets the press be the police at this point?
That's part of the problem I had with this story is that television still exists and the press still exists. And as awful as social media has been in recent past, like media has been equally worse, if not the worst thing to happen. Like Fox News is doing horrible damage to this country just as much as Twitter. Like Twitter seems neutral. Like you could use Twitter any way you want and it becomes that thing, but Fox News is just a funnel of hate that gets spewed out. And that's still in this world. Like if anything, it's more powerful now because it's the only outlet that people have available to them.
You kind of see
Yeah.
that too, actually, at the end, right? Where CNN has the story about, hey, this is what happened at the Wonder Wall, and like
Right, they're
that's the
lying
official
to
story, and
people.
there's no alternative view on that story. Like they've just
Exactly.
basically said, hey, it was an environmentalist thing, which boy.
Like it feels like more 1984 with government control of information in this world than
Although
like
weirdly, also like not government control, but press control.
right.
So the
Yeah, but the
the
press
fourth
is funded by
estate.
the government. Like the LA Times billboard at the beginning, which is a brilliant bit, is like your tax dollars at work, which I really loved actually. So the press is the government at this point, which is
True.
that's a whole hootenanny in and of
Well, and the
itself.
fact that libraries are lauded as this like as these special places of information and storage, but like it's not doesn't seem freely open to the public anymore.
Got barbed wire
Yeah.
fence around the LA library, which is like probably gonna happen soon. Let's be real.
Which like one of the main things of a library is that knowledge for all for anyone asking, and like they them like libraries today will defend your right to search. They won't reveal like you can't go into a library and ask for someone's search history. You can't ask
Absolutely right.
what books
Yep.
has this person been looking up. The librarians will defend that, and that's like what they do today. And that's not like that's sort of being celebrated in this book, but at the same time, it's not. It's very strange.
It's
Yeah,
mostly being
it was
celebrated.
it was a weird kind of view of libraries. I think that he even says in his pitch, you know, that librarians are the rock stars who can get you anything as long as it's safe and legal.
Right.
Which again is not what we do. I mean, you know, we're very
Who deems
firm
what's safe
on.
and legal? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like in Australia, the police do have the power to ban books, and there has been very rare occasions where we've been instructed by a supplier when we've received library material. We've been told, well, unfortunately, this one has to be destroyed because you know there's currently an active libel case or something along those lines, which is chilling when that kind of thing happens because um, you know, like that shouldn't stop people being able to access a printed book or things like that. But very much it's like when parents say, oh, my child borrowed this from the library. And I mean, unless it's like, you know, a DVD that clearly says R18, we're not going to stop them reading something that
Right.
that a parent might say is not age appropriate because we're not there for that.
Yeah, and at the same time, if a librarian did that to me when I was a kid, I would have probably not come to the library again. Like, part of the magic of the library is being able to find stuff that you wouldn't otherwise not have access to in a
Definitely.
way that, like, is much more organized than especially like the current internet, right? Like, I've also sort of mostly become a social media hermit, except the Twitter account for this podcast slash blog. And
Hmm.
like, the Twitter account is one of the ways I find some things. Mostly I just follow comic book people at this point, though, because that's the way I keep myself sane. Um, and then, like, how else do I currently find books, media, videos, like TV shows and stuff? A lot of it's recommendations from friends. A lot
Yep.
of it is just like, honestly, going into the library and being like, oh, this is new and it looks cool. Like, and if I was stopped from being able to do that, I don't think I would care about the library as much as I do.
And absolutely right. I think that that's the it's a public institution, and it's well it Pat said it very well. It's knowledge for all, and it's your choice what you do with that knowledge. And I did in preparation for the podcast. I actually asked a colleague of mine who's an ex police officer, and I said, what should we do if a police officer came through the door and asked to know what books somebody had borrowed? And this colleague, she's very sympathetic to the police, and I think with good reason. She has fond memories of it, but she immediately said, "Well, they've got to have a warrant." She said, "We don't hand over anything unless they've got a warrant. It doesn't matter what the case is."
Yeah,
And
which totally makes sense
that's
to me,
good.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
I was
we're actually in an interesting space. Sorry to keep going, but in Western Australia, we've got the QR code scan to check in when you go to a venue or anything like that. And it recently turned out that the police have been accessing that data in regards to they've accessed it twice in the nearly 12 months that it's been running, both times in regards to like a pretty serious assassination that happened.
Oh,
But we've
okay.
been promised from like day one that it would only be used for contact tracing in the event of a COVID outbreak. And it turned into a very interesting public kind of not mudslinging match, but it was quite civil in the sense of the premier, who's the state leader of Western Australia, Mark McGowan. He publicly said that he'd requested the police to stop trying to get safe WA data because he wanted to ensure that people would still check in. They didn't want to feel afraid that the police would know about it. And the police, quite politely said, "Well, no, we won't do that because it's legal, and we are obligated to use any legal means to investigate a crime." And so they had to actually push legislation through to change the law so that the police would no longer be able to access that information. And it was all very civil, and it was also good that the police didn't do what the premier had said, because the police should be independent of him, and they do have their thing. But it was just an interesting kind of case of that data being collected and immediately, well, not immediately, but being accessed for a purpose that we were told it would never happen.
so wild to see the police out here doing like rules lawyering in a board game of like, oh, well, I mean, like, you never said we couldn't have it, so we can have it, right? But
That's exactly right.
that's the thing,
Yeah.
though, is there's so much. The thing about the internet too, though, is that we put so much data out there too that there's no way for anyone to actually keep track of it too. Like, there's just so much data constantly being created. I'll see if I can find an article that something was talking about the actual growth of like the information created from like decade to decade, and our
Hmm.
information growth is just wildly huge at this point. And a lot of it's good. Like, we get to do contact tracing, right? Good. The
Yeah.
police can access that information to track criminals. Maybe good. The police can access that information to track whoever they want. Bad. So like
Bad.
that's the that's the gradient, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the privacy versus security thing, right? Like, how much of your privacy are you willing to sacrifice in exchange for feeling safe? And what does that really mean? Like, which do you value more? And it's a tough question.
It is, and I think
Absolutely.
the actual answer depends on an individual case by case basis, like the circumstances of the case. And that's what makes it so weird, is that you can't write a law that works that way because you can't like get into the specifics of every single thing. And like at the same time, we don't have laws for a lot of these things already. Again, comic is 8 years old. Brian K. Vaughan took a lot of shots at like, hey, this is what the world would have looked like in between 2013 and 2076. And he got a lot of guesses right. And it's weird to me to think about people have been thinking about this for over a decade and we still haven't responded to it quite the way we should have yet.
When the majority of our lawmakers are like 60 plus. Like,
well, I mean, yeah, the Mark Zuckerberg we sell ads senator moment, right? Of like, how does Facebook make its money?
When connecting to a Wi-Fi would probably be challenging for the majority of the members of Congress. It's hard to imagine that they'd be able to establish regulations and laws for the same technology. It's moving faster than governments can keep track of it. And whenever there's space, like room for abuse in anything, it's going to happen. So it's like a wild west of technology.
Yeah, and that brings us back, I think, to like the internet as an accelerator overall. And your argument, Pat, actually, that like, how could there possibly have been 50 times the technological advances after the internet goes down than there were before? Like, people not dicking around on social media, regardless of that.
Like I was alive before the internet was a thing. Like, but I wasn't I wasn't aware of it, and like I can't imagine going back to not having the internet now, right?
Oh,
like,
I can.
It's gotten to the point. Well, no, but it's gotten to the point where internet access should be a basic human right, right? Like everyone should have access to the internet because not having access to it is such a detriment to yourself.
I am actually legitimately torn in the way this book is between internet access is like everyone should have it. It should be like a utility at this point, or we should just shut the whole thing off. As a person who relies on the internet to do their job every day, basically, like I was thinking about how much of my body of writing work is online, and it's got to be 90x% of it, right?
I was gonna say, I think you're underestimating the effects of the internet on your daily life. Like,
oh no, I don't think I'm underestimating it. I'm still trying to figure out if it would be good or not.
I mean, I think it's good. Like, I think personally for you, I think it's good.
Yes.
I think it has the capability of being bad, but I think the good outweighs the bad. I don't know. I'm pro internet, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think I'm much more middle ground, and we'll let Jono say what he is.
I'm also very pro internet, and I think Pat, to your point, I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people would be very disadvantaged without the internet. And I'm thinking very selfishly. I'm thinking of regional Australia, which is where I live, and I'm thinking of we have a health campus in Albany with 100 beds. And we have a population of probably close to 40,000 people, and it's sometimes it can be very hard for the health campus to attract the kind of specialists that you might need in medicine. And so for certain areas of medicine, people have to attend what they call a telehealth consult, which is where they basically sit in a dedicated room in the hospital, which has all of the it has a very fancy teleconferencing piece of equipment that allows them to speak to a specialist in Perth, and the specialist can do, I think, 90% of what they would need to do with the patient. And that means that the state doesn't have to pay for these people to go up to Perth for these consults. And that's I mean, for those people, that can mean the difference between losing 2 days of your week because you have to travel to and from Perth. And that's huge. That's really huge. And I think similarly for a lot of people accessing distance education. So we've got one very small university campus in Albany, and that's basically just a branch campus from one of the ones in Perth, and it offers, I think, 4 or 5 degrees. It's probably more, but then unless you want to study those particular topics, your choices are either move to Perth, or they've just set up a dedicated what they call university hub, which is basically a place that if you have if you are studying a course in Australia at an Australian university, there's this hub that you can go to that has internet access, computers, a Zoom booth, so that if you have to attend a tutorial or something like that, you can do all of that, and that's all free as long as you remain enrolled at a university institution.
Yeah, I think the world would become incredibly small, right, without the internet.
Absolutely.
it levels the playing field and opens up opportunities that wouldn't be there otherwise. Like the amount of free resources available to someone. MIT and other like Ivy League schools have free courses available for anyone who wants to look at it. Like
Yeah.
you can job search anywhere in the world as opposed to in your local community, and that's massive for anyone who wants to find a job. Like
Mhm.
I think it's a good thing, this internet. I think there are like dark corners for sure, but humanity, like humans are
Dark
humans.
continents, perhaps.
Yeah, like I mean,
Like,
human nature is human nature, and it's gonna happen. But I think overall, it's a benefit.
All right, boys, we spent a half hour on that one.
Well, I mean, that's
should
what
we
this
talk?
comic
Should we
is,
talk
though,
about the
right?
book? No, it definitely is, right? And I think it makes sense for us to spend most of the discussion on that because that is ultimately, besides the plot elements, like it's ultimately what the book is about, right? So
well, was De Gaulle? I mean, he did commit several crimes in the sense of there were people that died at his hands. But was he committing a crime by trying to bring the internet back?
They don't really establish if there's like laws preventing reestablishing
I would
the
assume
internet.
there are, because otherwise someone would have done it before this.
How do you stop? Like, if the technology exists, which it does, like we see iPads and Zunes and like everything else, it's there, and there are obviously people who know how to like networking computers isn't like an arcane thing. It could happen. I don't know how you stop the internet from cropping up again.
Well, there were payphones, and the payphones presumably would need to be networked to a central switchboard, and I think that in itself is a network.
Yeah.
And certainly, I mean, his plan was an interesting one. So he, if you'll forgive me for recapping for some of the listeners, but he is essentially a television manufacturer. Do you think that's fair to say?
He's
Yes.
He's Jeff Bezos if Jeff Bezos made TVs and not Amazon Alexas, because
There
they're
you go.
almost the same device in this story.
True.
Exactly, because he has somehow, without the knowledge of the people who are installing all of the equipment in these TVs and things like that, created TVs that will be network or will network when he launches the final
His
phase of his
satellite,
plan.
yeah.
And for some reason, they'll have cameras in them, so
Yeah.
there'll be video TVs. But that, I mean, I suppose you could browse the internet with your voice, but just having networked TVs does not the internet make, I would argue as well.
Yeah, there was a strange disconnect between what Daguerre said he wanted from it and what he was doing. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
connected TVs with a camera doesn't connect the brightest minds in the world to
No,
discuss. Like,
It sort of does. I mean, it lets you do what we're doing right now, right?
definitely.
I guess, yeah.
It gives you Skype at a stretch.
Yeah.
It certainly gives you the ability to talk to each other on the over your television, but it doesn't give you the servers that would store the incredible amount of information that you alluded to, Matt, when you were talking about how much we generate when we're using the internet. So unless those servers still exist in this world that Brian K. Vaughan is positing, at best, like I said, this gives us Skype.
What I don't get is they have phones and they obviously have cameras.
And they have wristwatch phones as well, which I really liked.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the capability of talking long distance or even like conference calling, like if people wanted to get together and talk not in person, I feel like that's still a thing they could do in this world.
I was trying to figure out if the internet still exists outside the US, which I think would make his plan make more sense. Because the fact that, like, he's got his French last name, which may or may not be real, and, like, the people he imported to help him are French, just feels like to me. It feels like to me there was a sideline of this satellite is going to connect the TVs to the internet somewhere else, and that just, like, didn't make it in somewhere. So that's me guessing and, like, putting stuff in the story that's not actually there, I guess. But
He does say something about like the wars and plagues of other like nations not affecting
Absolutely right. Yep.
this private bubble of LA.
yeah, and like the US has definitely cut itself off in like a political sense at this point. So like I wonder if the internet exists outside the US and the US specifically made the decision of like, no, not for us. We're good, thanks.
Well, I mean, if something like Cloudburst did happen, the most embarrassed would not be individuals, but certainly states. The United States would, if everything that the United States had ever done was suddenly available online. I mean, you look at how they pursue somebody like Edward Snowden or Julian Assange just for a tiny, tiny fraction of that information. If everything were made live all at once, and I'm talking not just for the United States, of course, for every country. Every time that somebody's been disappeared or something like that, I would say that would be enough for countries to completely cut each other off and perhaps communicate only by coded message, left at a dead drop.
Same time, though, do you think that would actually happen? Because like countries have to communicate in some sense, right? So like,
well, the
is
global
it just
economy is like we saw in 2020 how important countries' GDPs
Definitely.
are for everyone else.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm purely speculating on the basis of what we see in the book. I think
Sure.
it's certainly in reality, definitely. I think it would make for some very awkward conferences, and I think I would very much enjoy watching those. But
yes.
but for the most part, I think it would be pretty much business as usual. But at least now we all know that we don't trust each other.
Yeah, overall the plan doesn't make sense. You guys are right without reading into it a little bit or like putting some pieces there that aren't explicitly in the text. Because otherwise you've just created a network of Amazon Alexas that don't actually access the internet.
If Daguerre didn't go around murdering people and didn't employ those French assassins who are obviously awful people, like I don't think what he did was bad. And like I didn't understand like Mel's conversation with him at the end where she was like obviously feeling like she was on her high horse about the fact that no, you're bringing the internet back, you idiot. Do you know what that would do? It's like I didn't understand why she was so upset.
Mel doesn't like TikTok, Pat. Mel, big TikTok hater.
I guess, but at the same time, like it didn't. Daguerre is a bad person, obviously, so he's a villain. But I didn't get why the villain was hated so much and why our protagonists were so against what he was doing.
I think that's because you're a pro-internet person, as we've discovered in our discussion. Whereas, like,
Matt finds him much more sympathetic. Yeah,
I do actually a little bit. Like, I kind of get it. Where she's like, "Why would you bring back this giant time-wasting device?"
But even PI at the end, it was more about rescuing Mel than it was stopping Daguerre, right?
Yes, absolutely.
He didn't care about what Daguerre was going to do with the 100%.
Internet.
Yeah. His motivation throughout this book shifts like at least 3 times, right? Of why he's actually involved in the story, which I think says a lot to why we're talking about the thematic stuff and like the societal stuff more than we're talking about the characters, because I think the characters are largely there to make the thematic stuff work in a lot of ways. Not always. Like there are good character bits too. And like Mel is probably my favorite character in the book, I think.
Like if Daguerre didn't kill anyone, I think his plan would have worked. Like he could have launched internet just fine. Like I don't understand. He made his own problems.
Yeah, sort of, right? Like if he had just stopped trying to kill the people who do what he was doing.
Mel is only trying to get revenge for the sister, and PI is only trying to save. Oh, I'm sorry, not Mel.
Ravina, right?
Ravina is only trying to get revenge for her sister, and PI wants Mel. So just like Daguerre, calm down. And
but he also like it seemed like he was quite far along in his plan. Like it took Nebula. I mean, I'm perhaps like I mean it's kind of hard to measure days, but it seems like it was potentially 48 hours from Taj walking through the door into PI's office to them essentially blowing a hole in the Wonderwall. And so, presumably, like he would not have been able to find out enough about Taj to, that she requests that he investigate her background. This is PI, and he would not have been able to find out enough about her to really lead him to Daguerre presumably until the rocket was in space. So I think you're absolutely right. I think his fatal flaw was tying up loose ends. In essence, actually created far more loose ends for himself.
Yep. Yeah, I was thinking about the story kind of taking place over the course of about a week, but you probably could fit it into a very busy weekend, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely some time lapses, when he gets when PI gets shot and things like that you could say more like a 24-hour period between getting shot and waking up and so on and so forth. But yeah.
So I feel like we've talked about, at least in a roundabout way, the story a lot for this book, and we haven't touched on the art so much. So we should probably take a bit to talk about that. How do you guys feel like the future looked?
It was beautiful. Really, really nice spreads. The art did a great job, kind of motion, which can sometimes be difficult. And I think in terms of being a sort of I don't know how to describe something like this, because a noir sort of invokes that sort of black and white sort of thing, but it definitely had that vibe, futuristic noir. But the future that sort of, I guess, is posited is one that's much more kind of. I mean, it's obviously very colorful by the sheer dint of the costumes and stuff, but also just the buildings themselves are much more sort of in tune with the environment and things like that. And potentially that's because you don't have to make allowances for things like infrastructure such as servers and things like that require different kinds of building setups. But yeah, I really liked the art for it. I thought it was far more than just serviceable. It wasn't just serving the story. I think it really elevated the material.
Yeah, I would agree. Matt, you and I talked sort of over text about the art, or at least you mentioned the fact
Yeah.
that you thought Martine had grown from this in the next few that you'd read that he
Yeah,
had
and how
written.
like amazing that is, because this is already very good.
I was gonna say I
Mm.
think I liked this more
Oh,
than
really?
say Barrier's art,
Oh,
and that
okay.
might just be
Interesting.
because I gelled with the story more than I did Barrier. Barrier has like you have to interpret things, which I enjoy at times, but it can be alien, which is what it was aiming to do. So I think
Hmm.
he succeeded in both. But I felt like this was great. And I certainly enjoyed all the character work, like the amount of different masks and costumes and disguises that he designed and illustrated just is fantastic.
Yeah, even just the sketchbook at the
Yeah.
end of like different concepts of masks and characters to put into the world, like
You can tell he had fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Which I
Definitely.
think is cool, right? When in the back matter when Brian K. Vaughan was putting his pitch together, he was like, I think I can give you a story that you'll be able to like rock out on, and
Go
Marcos Martin
wild.
definitely did rock out on this. Like it's a very good looking book. And talking about what Jono had mentioned of like it being animated, I think one of the biggest compliments I can ever pay a book is that it was hard to slow down enough to go back and like critique the art because the book reads so well and like in
Absolutely. Yeah.
97% of it that you want to just keep reading it. So yesterday
Yeah.
while I was putting my notes together, I had to like consciously be like, no, like let's look at the page, like let's look at the panel layout, let's figure out why this is working as well as it is, as opposed to just reading the book.
I'm drawn to because we've only touched on the character of Nebula, who is the kind of the Deus Ex Machina who can fix rockets and connect to them with
He can launch a
with all sorts.
rocket and create the internet at the same time in 2 days.
Exactly. But his mask in the first panel that you see him, his mask does such a wonderful job of establishing the character, because the eyes of the mask look, they're sort of, it's almost droopy dog, like it's a squid mask, but the eyes are just they're just hilariously depressing eyes,
Mhm.
Yep.
and they do such a good job of communicating the character, and I think that's where this book really shines, is that the mask that Daguerre sort of appropriates is that of a tiger. And, that's so appropriate as he sort of stalks his way through this landscape. He's so confident in what he's doing and in the rightness of it. He has no problem murdering and no problem abducting people and things like that. And he does later swap to a much creepier mask. But I just think that yeah, the work that's done there, it's so well done. I really enjoyed that. And as you said, like it's hard to, like I had to reread panels just to make sure that I was appreciating the art, because I was enjoying the story at the same time. Like it was flowing so well.
I did think it was funny that they poke fun at furries in this world where like you can do
Yeah,
whatever you want, but
Yeah,
furries are
that's so
still
weird, right?
like
Like
come on, leave the
furries are
furries
still
alone.
off.
so many people have animal masks. Like, wouldn't everyone be a
It's like,
part
oh,
of the
great, a
story.
furry. It's like, come, really? Really? The depravity that people do on the streets, but furries are still.
I will say though, I mean that is probably one of the few references that dates this book, because in 2013, we still weren't aware that well, I mean, maybe we were aware, but it wasn't as big, that Nazis had come back in. And so now, with the benefit of hindsight, we're looking back and we're saying, well, I mean, yes, furries, we don't necessarily understand them, but there are people that are Nazis. That's much worse. Or there's people that are furries and Nazis. And that's a whole thing, like that their whole identity revolves around that. And so, like, I think that is perhaps one of the few references that would date this material, is the disgust about furries, whereas now we have so much more to be disgusted about.
Right?
Yeah, and I mean the book does like the typical Brian K. Vaughan thing of like kind of shoehorning some sex stuff in there just to like have some sex stuff in there because it's quote unquote.
Well, PI seems to
shocking.
be pan, right, or bisexual,
Yeah,
which
Yeah.
PI was an
was
interesting
refreshing.
character for that. Yeah, exactly. But not a furry, like pansexual, but not into
Yeah,
furry.
but
not-
still judges
Full stop.
furries.
But no, but that is actually that is on theme, because one of the greatest moments, in my opinion, one of the greatest lines, has nothing to do with the internet, but it really is about the relationship with PI and Ravina, where it looks like they've teamed up and stuff, but at the end of the day, PI has not shared any of their life with Ravina. And it's after they meet with Star Maps and they have that interaction, and she
Yes.
turns to PI and she says, "I really don't know you at all, do I?" And PI just goes, "Well, that's exactly the point." And that to me is that's brilliant. Yeah.
That was my favorite line too. That was a good scene. Which is ironic because his mask is just a black line over his eyes.
Do you think that's because he figures that because everyone wears masks anyways, like no one would think that that's his real face? It's like his Clark Kent Superman thing of like, oh, I don't really have to wear a mask because no one would think that this is me.
Maybe?
I think in combination with the dream coat, and I think just generally, he keeps his life so private, private eye. It
Yeah,
is,
that he doesn't have
he
to worry
vets
about it,
all his
really.
clients exactly. So I think for him, it really is a case of he doesn't need to wear a mask that often, because the only people that really know who he is, he probably has more blackmail material on them than they would ever want to mess with, as that poor librarian finds out when they come knocking.
With this fish face.
That was another, actually, a good moment. That really did justice to the character again.
It's just great because you can see, seeing all these characters with the costumes and stuff, it's obvious that Vaughn took that for the freelancers for Saga and just continued that kind of, like the will and the stock is all I could think of when I see all these people with masks and stuff,
Oh, I see.
I need to read Saga. People have recommended it in the past. I'm making
It's
a
my
note of that one.
recommendation for this one. Saga and Why the Last Man. Just read them both.
Yeah, because that's coming out soon as a TV series, isn't it? Why the Last Man. I have read the Why the Last Man, I think, years back, but I think they're adapting it.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any low points or nitpicks that you want to talk about?
I think I've already discussed mine. The motivations are muddy for me. Other than bad guy needs to be defeated and an innocent girl needs to be rescued.
Yeah, I think I rubbed it up against those same points. And I think I think as a noir story, it really does do a great job, but when you stop to think too hard about the motivation, it does kind of start to fall apart.
When you get down to it, it's a pretty basic story. Like the world is
Yeah.
great and the questions it asks are fun, but the story itself is pretty boilerplate noir.
Yeah, I mean, I think the highlights here for sure are like the thematic / societal discussions and the art. Like that, like if I was going to start listing the comic strengths, I think I'd go that way. Maybe not in that order because the art's real good. Like, oh, Marcos Martin, it's like one of my favorite artists, and the coloring is so good too. Like
Mhm.
that neon pink
Definitely.
sky in the future is always going to get me. Like a good hot pink in a comic is there's nothing better.
I think I made a note. There's that chase scene in the tubes, and there's just like 5 panels of color.
Oh
And
yeah, that
it's all
page is so
beautifully
good.
done. Yeah.
Where you can follow each of them around the tubes.
Yeah, it's almost a shame that this was initially a webcomic, because it feels like it would have really been beautiful. I know that they have done a physical release, but
which is beautiful, by the way, because that's actually
yeah.
how Kat read it when she read it. Is she checked it out from the library, and it's like a oversized hardcover. So I think the pages are probably even a little bigger than this. Maybe not, but they're roughly the same size as what would be on your screen, but maybe a little bigger. And it's a gorgeous looking hardcover. Like, it's a good one for the bookshelf for sure.
Do you think the pacing, perhaps, and the motivation, and all the story issues that we've listed, do you think that those might have potentially been because of the desire to try and fit it into that what's the word that you guys would use for a regular release with a comic book, a serial,
monthly?
that attempt to fit it in a monthly, potentially, like to serialize the story. So like each one sort of ends on a cliffhanger or something like that, and presumably that would be where the book would end if you were reading it on a monthly basis.
I think some of it, yes. Like, I don't know if this entirely answers your question, but you can definitely feel Vaughn and Martine figuring out how they want to structure this book that they're releasing online, and they have no like real rules for as it goes, because the title card thing, like the private eye chapter or whatever, doesn't show up until chapter 3, and it's like one of them shows up like in the middle of a chapter, and you're like, oh, is this chapter done? No, there's like 3 more pages. And I think that's maybe why in chapter 6 you get the first caption that's like end of chapter 6. So like,
yeah, there you go.
They're still trying to figure out.
I didn't even pay attention to where chapter breaks were.
Well, see, I kind of did, because you could tell by the covers, and then like when the only reason they stuck out to me is when they were surprising, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, for the most part, completely fine, but like when a chapter break happened and I wasn't expecting it, or a chapter break didn't happen and I was expecting it, I noticed.
Sure. Yep.
But I think, to your point, Jono, like, it's definitely something that the Panel Syndicate creators, like the people behind all these digital comics, that's Marcos Martin's like digital comic platform essentially, like, are even still toying with, because the current book he's doing with Ed Brubaker, which is like you would actually really love it, Jono. It's a like young adult noir sort of thing. It's basically like what if Nancy Drew is about to go to college, but also Cthulhu's there, I think. There's a good short pitch for it. Like, they're doing variable page sizes per issue. So like one issue might be 28 pages and one might be like 40, the same way HBO can get away with one episode of a show is like 28 minutes and another episode is 40. So I think at this point they were probably still trying to stick to typical comic structure. Though I'm trying to figure out how many pages there would be per chapter here. And it's like, and
just
roughly
a note, because I was flicking through to your points, but the Schwarzenegger Medical Center, which I really liked.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite like called shots. I liked the Paul administration also.
Yes.
Not getting that one, I don't think. Trying to think if there are other great like called shots from the future. I did like that no one knew what the hell a fucking Zune was.
Zune was a good one. It's like, what is this? I've never seen it.
Because no one does know what the hell
it's
a
fucking Zune
was.
No,
even in the day.
It was such an interesting choice by a company. Yeah.
It was interesting to see our generation portrayed as Gramps in this.
Yeah,
that was
our ADHD
the same
riddled generation.
Exactly the same kind of respect, I guess. And I know that this is a generalization, but the same kind of respect, I guess, that our generation is said to have for the boomers, so to speak. And so, yeah, it was that was a good little twist of the knife.
Right. I didn't like that every time they talked, like, oh, those kids, they just pumped you full of meds. It's like, oh, come on.
that is the easy go-to, isn't it?
Personally, I've never had an ADHD pill.
Right? Like, some of us are okay.
Oh man, you've never lived.
Entirely possible, Jado.
They were demonizing the use of pills on those kids, but then PI is taking nano pills, which I don't know exactly what nano pills are.
Yeah, it's pills, but better, Pat.
Better pills, yes. He's also
exactly.
smoking, and like, I guess you just judge the older generation for all their sins, and then you
they always will
do them
right?
again.
Like,
Yeah.
People always think worse of the generation before them and the generation after them. Like, I was
That's
actually
right.
thinking about this in relation to when we were on our family vacation recently, me, Kat, and Kat's niece and nephew and her mom. The kids were just like tablets or YouTube videos at night, pretty much standardly. Like, it was just like their go-to.
Yeah.
And no headphones. So come on, kids. You're in a
Well, that's
public
just
space.
rude. Come
It
on.
is a
Now
little bit, right?
that I
And just
do
like,
agree with you.
and like one of the shows her niece was watching was about hoarders, and I was like, I don't want to do this. So I had to like corral them into doing like physical activities. Like we ended up doing a drawing telephone game and a story telephone game of like you write the first sentence of a story and the next person writes the second and blah blah blah. And those were really fun, but like again, because this is me coming back to the central argument again, like because the internet exists, I had to really prod to get there on that.
I don't know if like a generation raised on iPads is going to be an issue, but I don't know if you can just blame the internet for that. Like I think that would have been an outlet whether or not there was an internet on it.
This is fair and not fair, I guess. Like, right? Like there is me conflating the device with the thing the device is connected to, I guess. But at the same time, the internet makes it very easy to access your show about hoarders. You don't have to download it ahead of time and store it on your
So you
tablet.
could I don't think you can demonize the internet for that. I do think generations raised on YouTube is going to bite us in the ass. But
Yeah, 100%. I think microprocessors and things have far more to answer for and than the internet, and actually, have far worse environmental and economic impact on economies and things like that. You think about the amount of e-waste we generate simply replacing these devices, and in some ways, the internet, in fact, mitigates some of that because you can have computers that, rather than having hard drives and processors, video cards, all of that, instead they can just connect to cloud services, which means it removes some of the need to replace the computer as often.
mm,
And so, in some ways that mitigates that kind of e-waste. Of course, it's not a perfect solution, but certainly, yeah, the tablets, that's a very interesting one. It's cheap tablets flood the market, and that becomes, it's so pervasive, it's so easy to get your hands on one. And yeah, there's a lot to be said for the generation that comes after. Pat, I agree. I think I'm terrified of the generation that is raised with some of the behavior that you see from the Twitch streamers and things like that as being normalized.
like when Spider-Man and Elsa is nostalgia for a generation, I fear for us. I don't know. I don't know what it's gonna do.
Pat, are you gonna have to send me a link to whatever this Spider-Man and Elsa video is?
You haven't heard about this, Matt?
I've heard of it. I read it in as one of
I
those
haven't
articles
seen
about
this
YouTube
either.
algorithms and how scary kids YouTube is, which kids YouTube is freaking scary. If
They
you haven't been there.
basically unleashed, like computer algorithms to create YouTube videos
Yeah, so they just like
based
have
on what
one.
people's viewing habits are, and it gets really weird really fast.
Yeah, I will
Man.
find the article I read about it. I have not actually seen the video though, because again, I tried to preserve what my brain comes in contact with these days a little bit.
Now, I do want to ask, because I don't know much about Los Angeles. Well, I know a few things. I believe that's where Hollywood is. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Nope,
But
you're good
does
so
it
far.
typically have the Pacific Ocean quite so high?
I think
No.
that was
No.
it's a climate change
Yeah, it's
thing for
definitely a
sure.
climate change thing, which
The
comes around
oceans
with like
have
it being
risen.
environmental terrorists, and that's probably why all the buildings have so much greenery on them too, John. That's probably a
Very
reference
good
to
point. Very good point.
trying to keep
But
climate
would
change
that also
down.
not suggest then that the world is not going to be there? Because if like the Pacific Ocean has risen that much, like a lot of the world will be just gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I think that the Daguerre's plan. Where did he get those French people from? I mean, I know France
don't know.
initially, but
France.
were they living in France, or does France still exist in this book?
Or was the French another disguise that they put on?
Because
think
Daguerre
so,
speaks in
actually.
French. His final words are French, I think. Am I wrong? I'm just trying to open that to
Daguerre's?
that
No,
panel.
I think I said what happens next is your fault, or whatever it is what the last thing he
Yes.
says. Which is he he broke the dam, which wasn't Daguerre's plan, but
Yeah.
That definitely does have some connection, right? Like,
but like
just
Daguerre is a
on
French
account of his
name. I
last
don't know if
name,
that's
yeah.
his, like Nom de Guerre is a pseudonym, so I don't know that's
Yes.
actually his
Yeah.
name. But
I mean, it can't be, right?
right?
Well, I wouldn't think so. But he definitely speaks in French at one point, I thought.
He
Yeah,
talks
après
to the
moi. His
Frenchmen in French.
last words are après moi.
Oh, does he? Oh, well, there you
Yeah,
go.
his last words are French. This could just be a whole. Is Brian K. Vaughan like notably anti-France?
Go with yes until we're proved otherwise.
I think we can safely say that without any correction
Without
from
any
Mr. Vaughan.
research, yeah. Seems good.
He can reach out to us at any time and correct it, but until he does,
I'd just be so excited to get the email at that point. So,
Well, cease and desist.
Peter Framed does not hate
oh,
friends.
another quick side digression. We got a cease and desist on the T Public store associated with the blog because we had a thing with Nightwing in it, and they were like, "No, you can't." And I was like, "Oh, this is super exciting. We got a cease and desist."
Oh, well
That's why I
done.
noticed
me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's two good things about that. Number one, they noticed you, and number two, they thought that your Nightwing was a serious enough
They thought you were making
threat to
money
the
off
brand.
of it.
We've sold
Yeah, well-
zero of those. Zero of those, Warner Brothers. Don't worry.
They were concerned that it was good enough that they would sell. So that's that's a compliment in many
High
ways.
praise.
Yeah.
High praise from Papa AT&T.
Well, I mean, on the topic of the internet, I guess, Matt, one of the that I'm just about to duck into next is a gentleman called Cal Newport, who has written quite extensively on the topic of the debilitating effect that the internet has had on our ability to focus. And he's not suggesting that it is a bad thing, but he is suggesting that certain aspects of it are particularly terrible. So the book that I'm about to start reading by him is A World Without Email, and I've completed his book Deep Focus, which is an excellent. I was listening to it on Audible, but it was excellent to listen to. It was just very interesting, and it was very for a computer science. A PhD, he writes in a very accessible way, and certainly to a lot of your points about the internet, definitely agree.
Yeah, I think I have it on my reading list. Is Deep Focus different than Deep Work? Or are those the...
Sorry, it is Deep Work.
It is Deep Work?
Is the one that
Okay.
you're on. Yeah.
No, I've heard
There you
that
go.
one
Clearly,
highly
I was paying
recommended.
attention when I was listening to
You were
it.
reading it, yeah? You were too busy listening to what he was saying to know the title of the book. I understand. No, I've heard very good things about that too. That's actually on my reading list. I have a book that I'm reading right now too, which is similarly talking about kind of like how to sort of step out of the attention economy. It's called How to Do Nothing.
Oh, that
Can
sounds good.
Google quick the author because I'm blanking. Jenny Odell. So it's How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, and a lot of it is also talking about the fact that we're letting some of these devices and things like monopolize our time in a way that both takes away from our time and also like makes us really fearful that we're not productive at the same time. So it's just kind of like
absolutely.
trying to figure out how to sidestep all of that and like maybe get back into the real world and create 50 different technologies like the maglev car. So it was interesting to think about that book in contrast to like that specific point of the story, which I think we've all kind of debunked at this point of like, yeah, the internet actually kind of makes it easier to do things like that.
I mean, if anything, how much easier would it have been for them to just like take a photo of the plans and then email it to the police, or like any of that, like
Yeah. Yeah, and like also the fact that the French terrorists, quote unquote, had to store their directions to the dam in like multiple podcast form.
On the Zune of all things.
On the Zune. I mean, you got to put it on the least accessible device so that no one can find it, Pat.
I liked all the 50 apps of Angry Bird on the iPad too.
Yes, that was actually a clever reference. I did like that as well.
Yeah, that was a good called shot.
Could have been a Flappy Bird, but that's okay.
Do you think the CIA are ever going to come for wedding trade? Because you guys, like your episode titles, essentially, list out the next attack, right?
My God! Shh.
By the time we get to episode 50, our entire plan will be complete. It's the first letter of every story title.
We've been outed.
Stay tuned.
Jonathan, jump back to your pointing out that that Daguerre spoke French. The après moi. There is a French saying après moi le déluge. After me, the flood is a saying attributed to King Louis XV. It's basically after me, nothing matters. So look at Vaughan doing his homework. Plus, it's a literal flood. So there you go.
Yeah. But no, that's certainly that gives it a little bit more, a bit more oomph, definitely. And similarly, I mean, you know, I feel quite strongly that his death would spark awful things for France, and they are one of the strongest liberal democracies in the world, and all it took was revolution.
Yeah, way to go, Vaughan. You know how to write. I'll give you that.
I was gonna say, Pat, I do feel like every time we do a Brian K. Vaughan book on here, like you're into it, which is
like his stuff. I like his stuff.
Oh no, I'm very happy about it. Like that's why when Kat suggested Private Eye, I was kind of like, oh, we've done a book by like that exact same creative team before. I don't know if I want to do another one yet. And at the same time, I was like, but that creative team's very good, though. They're very good, and I know we'll have a lot to talk about. It'll be good podcast material.
Definitely. And I think to the creative team, I think the highest compliment I can possibly pay, I think, is that I have read this story before, but at the same time, I didn't know where the story was going. You know, I couldn't guess what Daguerre's plan was until the end of book, and I do think I'm usually, I can usually work the pieces out pretty quickly unless crucial information is being kept from me by the writer, and I think that the clues are there, and I think it's very well done. And while this, you know, this kind of prototype for this kind of story is told in hundreds of different ways, in, you know, from Detective Pikachu to lots of other things, I think that this is still a good, strong story, and it's in no way lessened by the tropes that they use. And I think you know, they do it so cleverly that it really stands on its own.
I really appreciate good world building and the fact that Vaughan knew what he needed to explain and then stopped. Like he left blank spaces.
Absolutely
is really intriguing. The fact that they say the word nim, they don't explain it. You can like say, oh, it's a pseudonym and it must be a thing that after you're 18, you get this wristband take. Like it's in the world, you see it like diegetically explained, like in the story, but it's not straight. Like no one sits you down and says, this is this world, this is what happened.
That's just show don't tell works really well, and I think that's that perfect partnership with the writer and the artist, because that's it serves the art serves the story, but also elevates it, and the story gives the art something to hold on to and gives it, you know, the ability to show so clearly.
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we actually like credit Marcos and Muntsa too for the world building, because I think so much of that is likely worked out either in sketchbooks or on the page. Like the colors being consistent from place to place so that the world like looks like kind of based like it really reminded me of the Batman Beyond future, especially at night.
Sure.
But like the outfits all being so colorful and also like all kind of fitting together too. Like for as many different Nims as there are in this story, like they don't really clash. Like they all kind of fit. Like, and I feel like a lot of the little called shots in each of the pages are probably on like in the art and not in the script. I'd be very interested to see, especially because I know Marcos Martin's a person who likes to rework scripts, like where the division of some of those things was, which you never get to know in a comic, which is the magic of comics. But this is another one, just like Barrier, actually, where I'd like to see who did what, like whose idea what thing was, which I'm sure they don't even know in a lot of places.
Well, I think like, I mean, it's only from reading the extras at the end of volume 1, where he talks about how the press won't wear Nims. They're always in plain clothes that identify them as press. And, you know, those the final panels where Strunk approaches Ravina is really great, because you've got all these very colorful things with the odd child who doesn't have a Nim, because we've established, or we intuit that children don't use them. then you've got this there's not this detective. You've got this member of the press walking through the crowd, very distinct because of that, and it all works really, really beautifully.
What did you guys think of the actual ending scene?
I was gonna bring that up. I didn't quite. It sort of lost me. I think there's a couple different ways it can be interpreted. Where Ravina takes the remnants of the dream coat and wraps it around her head, and you can only see her eye through it. Like, is she going to cry and wants privacy for that, or is it the private eye thing? The fact that she's peeking through this mask to look into the world. Like, I didn't quite know what they were going for.
I felt that she was accepting the I want to say the burden, but I guess the burden is probably I'm sure when you study journalism, one of the things that you dream of doing is becoming that investigative journalist who they break the story, they do things like that, and in this case, the member of the press has just warned her to stay away because freelance. Leave investigating to the professionals. But to me, this suggests that she is taking up the mantle. But I also don't know that PI is dead, because I think it would just be in his style to just not tell her that he's still alive.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually really love that it's left ambiguous whether he is alive or not.
Also, the fact that we don't know his name.
Yeah.
Yes. I actually, when I sat down to write, exactly, and I sat down to write my notes, and I was like, to write out, the names of the characters that I can refer to them and stuff. And I'd written PI for him, and then I was like, all right, now I just need to find his name. And there's so many clues to it, because there's his mother's funeral, there's all these other things, but it's never said. Even his grandfather, there's no indication of who his grandfather is. It's always just Gramps.
Yeah, we don't even know his mother's name though. Like, Patricia Immelman was just one of her
another one of her, one of many. Yeah. So, how did we feel about her? That's the scene with the mother.
I kind of enjoyed that dream sequence because it felt like a dream sequence should to me. And the funeral I thought was a good touch, and I actually did really like the transition from all of her multiple names to AKA Mom, like that.
Mom,
that was correctly for me.
Did they do that for every funeral though? It's got to be. Does every
That's
parent
a very
have
good point.
A pseudonym of mom and dad?
Probably depends on the officiant.
And also, like some of the pseudonyms, I mean, you presumably don't want parents to know, right? Like they might be related to some of the things that you're doing with the more interesting kinds of masks that you wear.
I mean, she's dressing up in pretty sexy outfit in front of him in the
first place, right?
But isn't the point of the NIM as well to be anonymous? Really having like a documented list of all your is problematic.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something you would have written down somewhere so that when you have a funeral, you can actually have people come to.
I'm pulling on threads that it's not fair to pull, because
I know. I think for the most part,
but
Pat's assessment of it being just enough world building that you don't care about the rest of it is
precisely
works until you just start doing a podcast about it. Which most people are thankfully not going to do, because this is the only podcast you'll need.
You got to tear apart the things you like. That's how you know it's good.
Have you either of you ever changing your name legally or moving to a different country, starting afresh? Is that how far down that sort of thinking have you ever gone?
I was actually thinking about it in relation to when Kat and I got married. We didn't change our names for a few different reasons. One of them being that both of us are published writers, so that if you change your name and you're a published writer and people try to find your stuff, it can be confusing. So that's an actual thing you have to think about in this day and age. One of them just being that screw the patriarchy was another one when we did it. But yeah, just a few different reasons, and considered moving to a different country a couple times, but I don't know. At the same time, we moved to California and then came back because it was not quite what we wanted. So I don't know that I would at this point. You've gone through that process, and
twice. I've done that twice. Yeah, and it was it wasn't easy. No. If anything, the government actually scrutinizes your identity quite closely. So yeah, I don't recommend it to people, but yeah, just interested to get that sort of like when I got married, Engela chose took my name, but that was purely because it's easier to spell than hers. And she deals with people that can't spell her surname regularly, so that was literally the decision. That was the calculation.
My parents tacked on their names together, so I feel like if and when I get married, I think I'll just keep tacking on at the
Just
end.
keep hyphenating.
Yeah.
I like that. How many names will your
Descendants
clan
have?
eventually gather? Yeah.
Yeah, we
Well,
considered
Angela
doing
wanted to do that as well, but because her maiden name also started with G, the concern was that she would be Dr. Egg, which I was very much in favor of. But
I was gonna say that seems like a pro, not a con.
That's just one more step to capturing little woodland creatures and going after rings and not liking
exactly.
You gotta be careful, Dr. Egg. That's a Sonic reference, man.
No, I got that one.
Okay.
I'm not on kids' YouTube watching the Elsa Spider-Man video, but I have.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes
video
that just gotta check.
Oh man, because Sonic was an interesting one growing up because they had a really metal. I say metal, probably more punk Sonic that I grew up with. I say grew up. I mean, I watched it on TV, but it was like it even had like a whole theme tune that was like, and their whole abilities were all centered around using musical instrument. And Sonic had family, which was also a bit unusual because, to my knowledge, he used to just be the blue. He's a hedgehog with a fox friend. Yeah, and yeah, so it was just really unusual to think of him as having a family. His mother apparently had to abandon them because there was an evil. I don't even think it was Dr. Robotnik. It might have been.
The Sonic verse is very strange.
Sonic the Hedgehog does not need a tragic backstory.
I've only dabbled.
He runs fast. That's it.
And it just to close the loop, it was called Sonic Underground. That was it was 1999.
Is this your recommendation for people who like
well, I mean, definitely listen to the theme song if you can, because that was it's still stuck in my head to this day.
So, Jono, when you were a kid, did you just like fall in love with the dark, edgy versions of all children's properties?
Well, I mean, I didn't have access to a lot else, so this was largely how I got.
The Hardy Boys are shooting terrorists. Sonic's in a metal band and his mom is dead.
I would argue with the Hardy Boys that I got the best version of them.
I don't think you're wrong. I mean, people who want to listen to that discussion could go back and listen to the Nancy Drew Hardy Boys episode, but the upshot of it is you're not wrong.
I'm in awe of Sonic Underground right now. I'm watching the intro. This is blowing my mind.
I thought that might be what's happening.
It goes way too hard for what it is.
I'm just looking at the logo and it's a lot.
Holy God.
I'm pretty sure, I actually think I can remember the lyrics to it as well. I think at one point they say, they made a vow their mother will be found.
Yes.
Sonic Underground.
And then they shot the mother crying in like a cloak.
Yes.
My goodness.
Oh my God, this is unlocking core memories for me. This is depressing that these are core memories as well.
See, without the magic of the internet, we wouldn't be able to.
The internet's amazing, man. I don't care what you say.
We wouldn't be able to waste our time learning about Sonic Underground and Chili Town.
Oh my gosh.
I think that this will play to any people. So I mean, there's definitely in this podcast. There's the Matt Camp, who is like vociferously anti the internet, wants it destroyed, wants to tear down this monument to hubris that we've built.
Yeah, and that's an accurate portrayal of my centrist position.
And then there's the Pat and Jono sort of tent where we're sort of we're very much in favor of the internet. You know, we argue that it doesn't cause distractions, but at the same time, as Matt is trying to wind up the podcast, we have
Sonic Underground, you guys.
Your ADHD Sonic Underground tangent. Are you guys on your iPads right now? Are you on your iPad?
I do just want to close the loop as well, because we obviously know that de Gaulle is a French terrorist. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we suspect he was. Sonic Underground's country of origin is listed as France.
I'm actually looking at that right now too. The name in French is Sonic Le Rebelle, which is pretty good.
This is the only Sonic the French could possibly make. I am so happy. Oh my God.
Pat, recommend some books to people who read this book and liked it.
I guess.
And then let's get out of here and watch some Sonic Underground.
As I said, I think Why the Last Man, also written by Vaughan, and Saga, also written by Vaughan, are two fantastic stories that I got same kind of feel. Why the Last Man has the like dystopian story that
Mhm.
this sort of dabbles in. And then Saga has the fun, wacky characters that you get to see. They aren't pseudonyms, they're actually aliens that look that way, but it's the same fun kind of looks and everything. I would also recommend HBO's Watchmen series, which also explores vigilantes that wear masks and what that means, that anonymity gives them, and the dangers and benefits of that.
Mhm.
So yeah, check that out.
I think I'm just gonna stand by my recommendation of How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy, because I think it's a good, probably in the same way Watchmen is like a good pairing with this, even if it's not a comic. So I'm gonna go with that. Jono, what do you want to go with for your recommendation?
Look, I'm going to own my recommendation, and I'm going to say Deep Work and A World Without Email. Well, I presume A World Without Email will be good. I will read it and update. If it turns out to be terrible, I will. You'll need to edit this put out. But
Of course, yes.
And Sonic Underground, obviously, as the
I was gonna say,
canon, the
of course.
definitive Sonic.
All right, boys, I think that is going to do it for this month's discussion of The Private Eye. Laughing too hard, can't get through the outro.
Stuff.
As always, if you want to get in touch with Pat or myself, don't. We're dropping off the internet before
Don't
the
you
cloud
dare!
bursts.
You stay off the internet.
Or you can find us on Twitter as @WattPodcast or email us at waitingonthetrade@gmail.com. Well, Jono, thank you so much for coming on. It is always a pleasure and a hoot, and I
It was
love
great,
it.
Jono. It was great.
Thanks for putting up with me again, guys. I have no regrets about Sonic Underground.
I honestly think the most successful podcasts are where we barely talk about the comic. So, in this case,
Yeah, well, if you
far and
need
away
me to
success.
if you need me to rant about privacy in Australia, government outreach, I am definitely the person to approach, and learnt that all from the Hardy Boys. Really, full circle.
It all comes back. Yeah.